The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor of the Ashford Hotel's presidential suite, creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock Elena Rodriguez as she stood frozen in the doorway. Her cleaning cart sat abandoned in the hallway behind her, its squeaky wheel still spinning slightly, a mundane sound that felt grotesquely out of place in this moment, that would change everything. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but I can't accept this." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts to sound professional, her accent thickening with emotion, as it always did when she was nervous. Damian Blackwood, tech magnate, youngest self-made billionaire in Silicon Valley, and the man whose suite she'd been assigned to clean for the past 3 months, didn't move from his position by the floor-to-ceiling windows. His silhouette against the glittering Manhattan skyline made him look like a figure cut from shadows and starlight, untouchable and terrifying in his wealth. "You didn't even look at the number." His voice was smooth, controlled, but Elena had learned to read the subtle tensions in his shoulders during their brief morning encounters. He was not a man accustomed to hearing the word no. Elena's fingers tightened around the envelope he'd pressed into her hands moments before. Thick, cream-colored paper that probably cost more than her weekly groceries. Inside was a check. She didn't need to look at it to know it would be life-changing. Men like Damian Blackwood didn't deal in small numbers. "It doesn't matter what the amount is," she said, forcing steel into her voice even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I'm not that kind of person, Mr. Blackwood." He turned then, and the light caught his face, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that held secrets she couldn't begin to fathom, and something else. Something that looked almost like respect. "You misunderstand me, Miss Rodriguez." He took 3 measured steps toward her, each one deliberate, each one making the enormous suite feel smaller. "I'm not propositioning you. I'm offering you a business arrangement." Business! The word tasted bitter on her tongue. She'd heard that euphemism before, in the mouths of powerful men who thought her immigrant status, her poverty, her desperation made her available for purchase. "Your mother needs a kidney transplant." His words hit her like a physical blow, and she actually stumbled backward, her hip catching the edge of an antique side table. How did he know? She'd told no one at the hotel about her mother's diagnosis, about the crushing weight of medical bills, about the nights she'd spent crying silently in the supply closet between shifts. The waiting list is 3 to 5 years. She has maybe 18 months. Elena's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "How dare you?" "I have connections at Columbia Presbyterian, the best transplant team in the country. They owe me favors." He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her think of old libraries and whispered secrets. "Your mother could have her surgery within 6 weeks. Full recovery, no debt, the best post-operative care money can buy." The envelope felt like it was burning her fingers. "And in exchange, marry me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and absurd. Elena laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed off the suite's high ceilings. "You're insane. I'm practical." Damian reached past her and pulled a folder from the nearby desk, flipping it open with practiced efficiency. Inside were documents, legal papers with more zeros than Elena had ever seen in her life. "My grandfather's will stipulates that I must be married by my 35th birthday to inherit full control of Blackwood Technologies. That birthday is in 4 months. I need a wife." "You need a miracle. This is mutually beneficial." "This is insane," Elena repeated, but her voice lacked conviction now. Her mind was racing, calculating, hoping against hope, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. "Why me? You could have anyone. Models, actresses, society women who actually belong in your world, because you're honest." His answer was immediate, delivered with such certainty that it made her breath catch. "In 3 months, you've never once tried to steal from me, flirt with me, or position yourself for advantage. You're invisible to people like me, which makes you perfect. And because when this is over, when I have my inheritance and your mother is healthy, you'll disappear back into your life without causing complications. No tabloid scandals, no messy emotional entanglements, no blackmail attempts." The clinical nature of his explanation should have been insulting, but instead, Eleanor found it almost comforting. This was transactional, clear, bounded, not the murky, predatory proposition she'd feared. "How long?" she heard herself ask, and knew in that moment that she was already lost. 18 months. long enough to satisfy the will's conditions and prove the marriage is legitimate. You'll live in my penthouse, attend necessary public events, and play the role of devoted wife. In private, you'll have your own quarters, complete freedom, and your mother will be cared for in a private facility with round-the-clock nursing. When the 18 months end, we divorce quietly. You'll receive a settlement of $20 million and a non-disclosure agreement. $20 million. The number was so absurd Elena couldn't even process it. She could barely imagine $20,000, let alone millions. Her mother would never have to worry again. Neither would Elena. Her younger brother could finish college. They could actually live instead of just surviving. "I need to think," she began. "Your mother's next dialysis appointment is tomorrow at 6 a.m. They're going to tell her that her kidney function has dropped another 15%. She has maybe one more year, Miss Rodriguez. Probably less." His eyes held no mercy, no apology for the brutal honesty. "I'm not trying to manipulate you with emotion. I'm presenting you with facts. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a contract, but it's also a lifeline." Elena looked down at the envelope in her hands, then at the folder of legal documents, then finally at Damien Blackwood himself. He stood perfectly still, a man carved from ambition and ice, offering her the impossible. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, a Faustian bargain that would consume her. But when she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face, growing thinner each day, the light dimming in eyes that had once sparkled with such fierce joy and determination. She thought of her mother cleaning houses on hands and knees to put Eleanor through community college, of the sacrifices made, the dreams deferred, the love given without condition or limit. "I want it in writing that my mother's care continues, even if something happens to me," Eleanor said. Her voice steady now, hardened by decision. "And my brother's college tuition, all 4 years. And I want my own lawyer to review every document before I sign anything." Something flickered across Damien's face. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Done. My attorney will contact you tomorrow morning. We can have the contracts finalized by Friday. The ceremony will be small, private, and completely legal. Then your mother goes into pre-op the following Monday." He extended his hand toward her, a gesture that seemed both casual and monumental. A handshake to seal a devil's bargain. Elena stared at that outstretched hand for a long moment, memorizing this instant, the moment before her life split into before and after. Then she reached out and clasped his hand. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not crushing. Human despite everything. "I'll need to give my notice at the hotel," she said. "Already taken care of. Your final paycheck will be deposited tomorrow, along with a generous bonus." Of course, he'd already assumed she would accept. Men like Damien Blackwood didn't offer deals they weren't certain would close. Elena pulled her hand back and clutched the envelope against her chest like a shield. "I should go. I need to tell my mother. Tell her you met someone. Tell her it was fast but real. Tell her whatever will make her happy, Miss Rodriguez. But don't tell her the truth." His face was unreadable, carved from marble. "That's the first rule of our arrangement. No one can ever know this is anything but a genuine love story. My grandfather may be dead, but his lawyers are very much alive and they will be watching. So we lie to everyone." The words tasted like ashes. "We perform," Damien corrected. "There's a difference. Actors aren't liars, they're storytellers. We're simply telling a story that everyone wants to believe, that love can cross boundaries of class and circumstance, that Cinderella stories still happen, that fairy tales are real. But it's not real." "No," he agreed, "but perhaps that's better. Reality is messy, complicated, and often disappointing. What we're creating is cleaner, safer. No one gets hurt because no one's heart is actually involved." Elena wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But exhaustion was setting in, the bone-deep weariness of too many double shifts, too many nights sleeping on hospital waiting room chairs, too many years of just barely holding everything together. She was so tired of being strong. "I'll see you Friday, Mr. Blackwood." "Damien," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should probably start using my first name. And I'll call you Elena." Her name in his voice sounded different, not like the harsh way her supervisor barked it when she was running behind, or the worried way her mother whispered it during bad nights. In his mouth, her name sounded almost valuable, like something worth holding carefully. "Friday," she repeated, and fled before she could change her mind. before reality could catch up with the insane thing she'd just agreed to do. Behind her, Damien Blackwood remained standing by the windows, watching her reflection disappear in the glass. He didn't move for a long time after she left, his expression unreadable as he stared out at the city he'd conquered, a city that was about to witness the performance of his lifetime. What neither of them knew, what neither could have predicted, was that sometimes the line between performance and reality blurs in the dark, and sometimes the heart has plans that logic and contracts can never anticipate. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than either of them realized. The morning of the wedding arrived wrapped in fog, as if even the weather understood the surreal nature of what was about to occur. Eleanor stood in front of the full-length mirror in a boutique whose price tag she'd deliberately avoided looking at. Staring at a stranger wearing her face, the dress was simple. Damien had insisted on understated elegance rather than ostentatious display, but simplicity achieved through thousands of dollars worth of silk and hand-stitching was a different creature entirely from the simplicity of her usual thrift store finds. The ivory fabric draped across her body like water, transforming her from cleaning woman to something that almost looked like it belonged in Damien's world. Almost. Your mother called again, Sophie. The wedding planner Damien had hired announced from the doorway. Her tone was professionally neutral, but Elena caught the slight judgment underneath. Sophie had made it clear through 1,000 subtle signals that she found this whirlwind wedding suspicious at best, scandalous at worst. She wants to know if she should wait for you at the venue or if you want her to ride with you. Eleanor's reflection showed eyes bright with unshed tears. 3 days ago, she'd sat beside her mother's hospital bed and lied with a skill she hadn't known she possessed. She'd spoken of a chance meeting, of coffee dates that never happened, of falling in love so quickly it felt like drowning. Her mother, weakened by dialysis but still sharp as a blade when it came to her daughter, had looked at her with those knowing eyes and asked simply, "Does he treat you well?" Yes, Elena had answered, and that at least was not entirely a lie. In the week since their agreement, Damien had been nothing but professional, courteous, efficient, and completely distant. He'd arranged everything with the precision of a military operation. The apartment she'd moved into, separate from his penthouse until after the wedding, to maintain propriety, the lawyer who'd walked her through every clause of their contract, the shopping expedition for a wardrobe appropriate to her new role. He'd even arranged for her mother's transfer to Columbia Presbyterian 3 days early, citing an unexpected opening in the surgery schedule. Elena had cried in a bathroom stall for 20 minutes when she'd learned the truth. There had been no opening. Damien had simply paid another patient to postpone their surgery. The casual deployment of that much power had terrified her. "Tell her I'll meet her there," Elena said finally, tearing her gaze away from her reflection. "I need a few more minutes." Sophie nodded and disappeared, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the stranger in the mirror. She touched her face gently, as if to confirm it was still her. Still the girl who'd crossed the border in her mother's arms at age 6. Still the teenager who'd learned English by watching cooking shows on a borrowed TV. Still the woman who'd scrubbed toilets with bleeding hands to help pay for her brother's textbooks. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "It's only 18 months. It's just a performance. And Mama will live." Her phone buzzed with a message. "Damien, the car is waiting. Everything is ready, are you?" Elena's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was she ready? Ready to lie to everyone she loved? Ready to step into a world where she didn't belong? Ready to marry a man who looked at her like an equation to be solved rather than a person to be known? "Yes," she typed back, because ready or not, there was no turning back now. The ceremony took place in a private room at the courthouse. No flowers, no music, no crowds of well-wishers. Just Elena, Damien, their mothers, Elena's brother Miguel, and 2 witnesses Damien had brought from his legal team. The stark efficiency of it felt appropriate somehow, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the transactional nature of what was occurring. Elena's mother looked smaller than usual in her wheelchair, the yellow tinge of kidney failure still visible in her skin, despite the emergency dialysis she'd undergone the day before. But her eyes were bright, and when Eleanor took her place beside Damien, her mother was smiling through tears of joy. The guilt nearly broke Elena's composure. Damien's mother, by contrast, was a study in controlled displeasure. Victoria Blackwood sat ramrod straight, her designer suit probably worth more than Elena's childhood home, her expression carved from ice. She hadn't spoken a single word to Elena beyond a clipped, "How do you do?" when they'd been introduced 5 minutes ago. The judge, a friend of Damien's. Naturally, because men like Damien Blackwood didn't do anything without connections smoothing the way, began the ceremony with practiced efficiency. Elena barely heard the words. She was too aware of Damien standing beside her, his presence like a force field of controlled power. He'd worn a simple dark suit, but on his frame simplicity translated to devastating elegance. "Do you, Damien Alexander Blackwood, take Elena Maria Rodriguez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, clear, betraying nothing. A perfect performance. "And do you, Elena Maria Rodriguez, take Damien Alexander Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it, the point of no return. Elena could feel her mother's hopeful gaze, could sense Miguel's protective concern, could practically taste Victoria Blackwood's disapproval. She thought of the contract sitting in her new apartment, with its clauses and stipulations and escape hatches. She thought of the promise of $20 million and her mother's health and a life without constant grinding poverty. "I do," she said, and the words came out stronger than she'd expected. The judge smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Elena's heart stopped. They'd practiced this moment once, just once, in Damien's office 2 days ago. A quick dry run to ensure they could make it look believable. That kiss had been brief, professional, completely devoid of feeling. This was supposed to be the same, but when Damien turned to her, something in his expression made Elena's breath catch. He moved slowly, giving her time to prepare, and cupped her face with one hand, a gesture that felt almost tender despite the complete lack of real emotion behind it. His thumb brushed her cheekbone and then he leaned in. The kiss was soft, controlled, lasting exactly the appropriate amount of time for a courthouse wedding. His lips were warm against hers, and he tasted faintly of coffee and mint. It should have felt like nothing, a meaningless gesture, a checked box, a performance for their tiny audience. Instead, Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, some carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart to protect herself from the insanity of this situation. For 3 heartbeats, it felt real. For 3 heartbeats, she forgot about contracts and money and lies, and simply felt the warmth of another human being touching her gently, carefully, as if she were something precious. Then Damien pulled back, and his expression was perfectly neutral again, and Elena remembered with crystalline clarity that none of this was real. Her mother was crying. Miguel was trying to look happy, but failing to hide his worry. Victoria Blackwood had her phone out, probably already texting her lawyers to investigate ways to invalidate this marriage. "Congratulations," the judge said, shaking both their hands. "And may you have many happy years together." Elena forced herself to smile, to accept her mother's tearful embrace, to endure Victoria's cold handshake and even colder welcome to the family. She signed the marriage certificate with a steady hand, watching her signature appear next to Damien's bold scrawl, making it legal, making it real, making it binding. She was married. She was Mrs. Elena Rodriguez Blackwood. She was living a lie that would last 18 months. The champagne toast afterward, arranged by Sophie at a private restaurant nearby, passed in a blur. Elena went through the motions, laughing at appropriate moments, blushing when required, playing the role of blissfully happy newlywed with an accuracy that frightened her. She'd never thought of herself as an actress, but apparently desperation was an excellent teacher. Damien was equally convincing. He touched her hand at appropriate intervals, smiled at her with an expression that could almost pass for affection, told a charming and completely fictional story about their first meeting that made even Victoria's lips twitch toward a smile. They were selling the fairy tale, and everyone except Miguel seemed to be buying it. Her brother cornered her in the hallway outside the restrooms, his young face tight with worry. At 19, Miguel still saw the world in black and white, right and wrong, without the complications that desperation and adulthood brought. "Lena, you don't have to do this," he said urgently, using her childhood nickname. "If this is about Mama's medical bills, we can figure something else out. We can get loans, find programs. Miguel, I see how he looks at you. Like you're a business deal, not a person." His hands gripped her shoulders. You're worth more than this. You deserve someone who loves you, who sees you for who you are. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. I'm happy, she lied. I know it seems fast, but sometimes you just know. When it's right, you know. Bullshit. Miguel's curse shocked them both. Their mother had raised them never to use such language. For you're the worst liar I've ever met, Lena. Your left eye twitches when you're not telling the truth. It's been twitching since you told us about him. She hadn't known about the eye twitch. That was problematic. How many other tells did she have that would give away the truth? This is my choice, she said firmly, straightening her spine. And it's done now. So please, for Mama's sake, just be happy for me. She needs this joy. She needs to believe I'm going to be taken care of. Miguel stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him struggling, wanting to protect her, wanting to respect her autonomy, wanting to shake her until she admitted the truth. Finally, he pulled her into a fierce hug. If he hurts you, I'll kill him, he whispered against her hair. I don't care how much money he has. I'll find a way. He won't hurt me, Elena said, and that at least was probably true. You couldn't hurt someone you felt nothing for. Indifference was its own kind of protection. When they returned to the private dining room, Damien was standing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression darker than she'd seen it before. He ended the call when he saw her, but not before she caught the words, "Handle this now before it becomes a problem." "Everything okay?" she asked, slipping automatically into her role. "Fine," he said, but his jaw was tight. "Just business. Nothing to worry about." Then louder, for the benefit of their audience, "I was just thinking we should leave soon. It's been a long day, and I'm eager to show my bride her new home, their new home." The penthouse she'd only seen once, during a brief tour that had left her dizzy with its opulence. 30 floors above the city, with views that seemed to encompass the entire world, full of art and furniture and space, so much space that a person could disappear inside it. The goodbyes were mercifully brief. Her mother extracted promises of daily phone calls and weekly visits. Miguel glared suspiciously at Damien one final time, and Victoria left without saying goodbye at all. Then it was just the two of them, in the back of a black car with tinted windows, heading toward their new life together. They didn't speak during the drive. Elena watched the city stream past, wondering at what point in the last 2 weeks her life had become completely unrecognizable. Damien stared at his phone, typing rapidly, his face illuminated by its cold glow. It wasn't until they were alone in the elevator, rising toward the penthouse, that he finally spoke. "You did well today. Very convincing." His tone was approving but distant, like a director pleased with an actress's performance. "Thank you." She'd meant it to sound casual, but somehow it came out bitter. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse because, of course, they did. Separate elevators for separate classes was apparently still the rule even in the 21st century. The space opened before them like a cathedral of glass and steel and money. "Your rooms are to the left," Damien said, already loosening his tie. "Mine are to the right. The kitchen and common areas are shared, but I'm rarely here. I usually work late and eat at the office. Mrs. Chen comes in daily for cooking and cleaning. She's been told you're my wife, obviously. But she's also been with my family for 30 years and knows when to be discreet. So she knows this is fake." It wasn't a question. Damien paused in the act of removing his jacket. And for the first time since she'd met him, he actually looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Chen knows that wealthy families sometimes have complex arrangements. She won't judge and she won't gossip." "How reassuring," Elena muttered. "Elena." He said her name sharply, and she turned to face him fully. "I need to know you understand the rules. No one outside this apartment can ever suspect this isn't real. Not your friends, not my colleagues, and especially not the media. My grandfather's estate lawyers are watching for any sign of fraud. If they find evidence this marriage is a sham, the inheritance reverts to a distant cousin who will dismantle everything my grandfather built. Do you understand?" "I understand I'm being paid $20 million to lie convincingly for 18 months, she shot back. "I may be poor, Mr. Blackwood, but I'm not stupid." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or respect, or anger. She couldn't tell. "Damien," he corrected. "We're married now. We should probably maintain the intimacy of first names even in private." "Intimacy," Elena repeated with a hollow laugh. "Right. Because that's exactly what this is. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You knew what this was when you agreed. If you're having second thoughts, my mother goes into surgery Monday morning for a transplant that will save her life. Eleanor interrupted. I'm not having second thoughts. I'm simply acknowledging reality. Good. He turned away, clearly considering the conversation over. I'll be in my office for the rest of the evening. Feel free to explore, make yourself comfortable. This is your home now. For 18 months, she couldn't help adding. He paused at the threshold of his wing of the penthouse, his back to her. For 18 months, he agreed. Then he disappeared, leaving Eleanor alone in a space so large and empty that her footsteps echoed like gunshots. She found her way to her rooms, a bedroom larger than the apartment she'd shared with her mother and brother, a bathroom with a tub that could fit 3 people, a walk-in closet already filled with clothes she'd never chosen and wouldn't have known how to wear. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and completely impersonal. It felt like a very expensive hotel room, not a home. Elena sat on the edge of the massive bed and finally let herself cry, for the life she'd left behind, for the lies she'd have to tell, for the careful distance in Damien's voice when he called this place her home. She cried until she was empty, until the tears ran out and left her feeling hollowed and strange. Then she wiped her face, straightened her spine, and began the process of unpacking. She was Elena Rodriguez Blackwood now. She'd made her choice, signed her contract, sold her soul for her mother's life. The least she could do was commit to the role. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that across the penthouse, Damien Blackwood stood in his office staring at his phone, at a text message he'd received during the ceremony that changed everything. She's been asking questions about you, about the real reason you needed to marry so quickly. You need to shut this down before she ruins everything. Deleted the message and poured himself a drink with steady hands. The situation was more complicated than he'd admitted to Elena. The marriage hadn't just been about his grandfather's will. There was another player in this game, someone dangerous, someone who knew secrets that could destroy him if revealed, and now his convenient, temporary, emotionally neutral arrangement with Elena Rodriguez might be the only thing standing between him and catastrophe. He raised his glass to his reflection in the darkened window and whispered to the stranger looking back, "May God forgive me for what I'm about to put her through." The first cracks in the carefully constructed lie had already begun to show, and neither of them was prepared for what came next. 3 weeks into the marriage, Elena had mastered the art of existing in liminal space, present but not present, part of Damien's life but separate from it, visible to the world but invisible in her own home. She'd learned to move through the penthouse like a ghost, timing her presence to avoid unnecessary interaction, maintaining the fiction of marital bliss for the housekeeper while living in practiced isolation. Her mother's surgery had been a success. That knowledge carried Elena through the loneliest moments, through the nights when she lay awake in her too large bed, wondering what she'd become. The transplant had gone flawlessly, and her mother was recovering in a private facility, where nurses checked on her every hour, and the food looked like it came from a restaurant instead of a hospital cafeteria. Miguel had even sent her photos, their mother sitting up, color returning to her skin, actually smiling. It was worth it, Elena told herself. Any price was worth that smile, but the price kept increasing in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Mrs. Blackwood, there's a fitting scheduled for you this afternoon at 2, Mrs. Chen announced one Tuesday morning, setting breakfast on the kitchen island, where Elena sat nursing her second coffee. "For the charity gala this Saturday, Mr. Blackwood asked me to remind you it's extremely important you attend." Elena's stomach tightened. The gala. She'd been dreading it since Damien had mentioned it in passing a week ago, her first major public appearance as his wife, her debut into the society that would judge her every word, every gesture, every choice of silverware. Did he mention he'd be coming home to escort me, or should I meet him there? She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. Damien had spent maybe 10 collective hours in the penthouse since the wedding, always working, always busy, always somewhere else. Mrs. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but Elena had learned to read the tiny fluctuations, a slight tightening around the eyes that suggested sympathy, or perhaps pity. "He said he'd meet you at the venue. He has meetings until 7. Of course he did. The fitting was an exercise in humiliation disguised as luxury. The designer, A rail-thin woman named Celeste, who air-kissed Elena's cheeks while her eyes assessed and found lacking, brought 5 gowns, each more elaborate than the last. Damien suggested something that makes a statement, Celeste said, running her fingers over a scarlet number that would have looked stunning on someone with the confidence to carry it. He wants everyone to know exactly who you are. And who am I? Elena wanted to ask. The cleaning woman playing dress-up? The poor immigrant who sold herself for medical bills? The lie-wearing diamonds? She settled on a midnight blue gown that made her feel slightly less like an imposter. Elegant but not showy, expensive but not ostentatious. When she looked in the mirror, she could almost convince herself she belonged in this world. Almost perfect, Celeste declared, though her tone suggested she'd never describe anything Elena wore as truly perfect. Though we might want to do something about your hair. And perhaps a consultation with Dr. Morrison. Just some preventative work, subtle enhancements, nothing dramatic. Elena tuned her out, focusing instead on her reflection and the stranger looking back. She barely recognized herself anymore. 4 weeks ago, she'd been wearing second-hand uniforms and rubber gloves. Now she was discussing which designer gown made the right statement, in an apartment that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. The transformation should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like erasure. The night of the gala, Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror for 45 minutes, trying to calm the panic attack that kept threatening to consume her. The dress fit perfectly. Her hair had been styled by a professional who'd spent 2 hours creating what should have been effortless waves. Her makeup was flawless, applied by an artist whose hourly rate exceeded Elena's former weekly salary. She looked like she belonged. But looking like something and being something were very different things. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damien. Car will be there in 15 minutes. Remember to smile. Remember the story. You're happy, in love and grateful for this opportunity to give back to charity. Nothing complicated, right? Just lie to a room full of Manhattan's elite while wearing shoes that cost more than a used car. All while pretending to be madly in love with a man who treated her like a business obligation. The car ride to the plaza felt both endless and too short. Eleanor watched the city lights stream past, practicing her smile in the window's reflection, rehearsing the story of their whirlwind romance that was now as familiar as her own name. They'd met when he'd stayed at the hotel. She'd brought him fresh towels. They'd talked about art and dreams and second chances. It was love at first sight, or maybe second. The story varied slightly depending on who was asking. All of it fiction. All of it carefully constructed to pass scrutiny. The plaza's grand ballroom was exactly what Elena had feared, a cathedral of wealth where crystal chandeliers cast expensive light on expensive people wearing expensive clothes. She stood at the entrance, paralyzed by the sheer overwhelming nature of it, until a hand touched her elbow. Mrs. Blackwood, this way, please. A young man in a staff uniform guided her through the crowd, and Eleanor felt every eye turn to assess her. She heard the whispers starting, saw the phones coming out, watched as New York society got its first real look at Damien Blackwood's mysterious bride. Then she saw him. Damien stood near the bar, surrounded by a cluster of people who leaned in when he spoke like flowers seeking sun. He was wearing a tuxedo that had probably been custom-made, and the effect was devastating. Eleanor had known intellectually that he was attractive. You didn't become a billionaire bachelor without good genetics and better grooming. But seeing him in his element, commanding attention without effort, made her breath catch. He looked up as she approached, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation, or something else she couldn't name. Then his expression smoothed into the public mask he always wore, and he excused himself from his companions to meet her halfway. Elena. He took her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that should have felt old-fashioned, but instead felt almost possessive. You look beautiful. Thank you. She remembered to smile, remembered to blush slightly, remembered that they were being watched by 100 people who would dissect every micro-expression. I'm sorry I'm late. Traffic was... You're right on time, he interrupted smoothly, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. Up close she could smell his cologne and see the slight tension in his jaw. Something was wrong. Shall we make the rounds? There are several people eager to meet you. The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and air kisses, and carefully pleasant conversations. Elena met tech executives and hedge fund managers and society matrons who smiled with their mouths while their eyes performed complex calculations. She laughed at appropriate moments, demurred gracefully when asked invasive questions about the wedding, and played her role with an accuracy that should have been impossible for someone who'd learned her lines only weeks ago. Desperation, she was learning, was an excellent acting coach. "You're doing remarkably well," Damien murmured, during a brief moment of privacy between introductions. His hand was on her lower back, maintaining the appearance of intimate connection. "I'm impressed. I'm well trained," Elena replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "You bought a wife, not a pet, but the skill set seems similar." His fingers tightened fractionally against her back, the first genuine reaction she'd gotten from him all evening. "We should discuss this later. Somewhere private." "Why? Worried I might break character?" She kept her smile fixed in place, even as something reckless and angry rose in her chest. "Don't worry, Damien. I know my lines." Before he could respond, a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife through silk. "Damien, darling, you've been hiding from me all evening." Elena turned to see a woman approaching, tall, blonde, perfect in the way that suggested extensive professional maintenance. She wore a white gown that clung to her body like a second skin, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been made to feel she didn't belong anywhere. The temperature around Damien seemed to drop several degrees. "Vanessa, aren't you going to introduce me to your wife?" The pause before the last word was deliberate, loaded with implication. Elena felt Damien's entire body tense beside her, but his voice remained perfectly controlled. "Elena, this is Vanessa Hartley." "Vanessa, my wife, Elena Rodriguez Blackwood." Vanessa's smile was razor-sharp. "How absolutely charming. You know, Damien, when I heard you'd gotten married, I simply couldn't believe it. Not after our conversation 3 months ago about how marriage was a prison for fools and romantics." Her eyes flicked. To Elena, with barely concealed contempt. "But then I heard about your grandfather's will, and suddenly it all made so much sense." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Elena felt her carefully constructed composure cracking, felt the eyes of nearby guests turning their way, drawn by the scent of scandal. "Vanessa, this isn't the time," Damien began, but she cut him off. "Oh, but it's the perfect time. I mean, everyone's wondering, aren't they, how a hotel maid managed to snag Manhattan's most eligible bachelor in less than a month." She laughed, but there was nothing humorous in the sound. "It's quite the fairy tale. Almost unbelievable." Elena's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to meet Vanessa's gaze directly. "Love doesn't follow a timeline, Miss Hartley. When you know, you know." "How profound," Vanessa's smile widened. "And tell me, Mrs. Blackwood, what exactly did you know? That Damien needed a convenient wife before his 35th birthday? That there was money involved? That this whole thing reeks of, that's enough." Damien's voice cut like steel, cold and absolute. "You need to leave now, or what? You'll have security remove me? That would make quite the scene, wouldn't it?" Vanessa tilted her head, studying Elena like a specimen under glass. "She doesn't even know, does she? Poor thing." "You haven't told her about it, Vanessa?" The single word carried such weight that even through the crowd noise, nearby conversations stuttered to silence. "Leave, now, before you say something you'll regret." For a moment, Vanessa looked like she might push further, might expose whatever secret she was threatening to reveal. But something in Damien's expression must have warned her off, because she simply shrugged and turned away, calling over her shoulder, "Enjoy your performance, Mrs. Blackwood. I wonder how long you can keep it up." The silence that followed her departure was deafening. Elena could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting like wildfire through dry grass. Her hands were shaking and she clasped them together to hide the tremor. "We're leaving," Damien said quietly, already guiding her toward the exit. "We can't just, people will talk. They're already talking." His jaw was set in a hard line. Better to leave with dignity than stay and give them more ammunition. The car ride back to the penthouse was conducted in suffocating silence. Elena stared out the window, replaying every word of Vanessa's attack, trying to pass what had been said and, more importantly, what had been implied but left unsaid. It wasn't until they were alone in the elevator that she finally spoke. "Who is she?" "No one important." Damien's tone discouraged further questions. That's not an answer. Elena turned to face him fully. She knew about the will. She knew about this being an arrangement. How? Because Vanessa and I dated for 2 years, and I was stupid enough to discuss my grandfather's stipulations with her when we were together. He loosened his tie with sharp, frustrated movements. She's been a problem since the breakup, but I thought she'd moved on. Obviously, I was wrong. The elevator doors opened into the penthouse and Damien strode out, heading immediately for his office. But Elena followed, emboldened by anger and humiliation. What did she mean when she said I didn't know? That you hadn't told me about something? Damien stopped at his office door, his back to her. Elena, it's late. We're both tired. Let's discuss this tomorrow. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. I did everything you asked tonight. I smiled, I lied. I played the perfect devoted wife while being humiliated in front of half of Manhattan. The least you can do is tell me what the hell is actually going on. He turned slowly, and in his eyes Elena saw something she'd never seen before. Genuine conflict. For the first time since she'd met him, Damien Blackwood looked like he didn't have all the answers. There are aspects of this arrangement that I didn't disclose because I didn't think they would become relevant, he said finally. What aspects? He studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh his options. Then he sighed and gestured toward his office. You should sit down. Elena's heart hammered as she followed him into the space she'd never entered before, a room of dark wood and leather, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Damien poured himself a drink with steady hands, then seemed to think better of it and poured a second for her. I told you the truth about my grandfather's will, he began, handing her the glass. But I didn't tell you why he included that particular stipulation, which was, my grandfather believed I was incapable of genuine human connection. He thought I was too much like my father, cold, calculating, treating people as transactions rather than relationships. Damien's voice was flat, almost clinical. The marriage requirement wasn't just about securing the family line. It was meant to force me to learn how to care about someone other than myself. Elena took a sip of the drink, whiskey, smooth and expensive, and felt it burn away some of her shock. So this whole thing, our agreement, it's exactly the opposite of what he wanted. Spectacularly so. Damien almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. The irony isn't lost on me. But that still doesn't explain what Vanessa knows, what she was threatening to reveal. Damien moved to the windows, his silhouette dark against the city lights. When he spoke again, his voice was so quiet Elena had to strain to hear it. My grandfather didn't just die, Elena. He was murdered. The world tilted sideways. What? The official cause of death was a heart attack. But 3 days before he died, he called me to his home and told me he'd discovered something. Evidence of massive financial fraud within Blackwood Technologies. He said someone on the board was embezzling millions, using offshore accounts and shell companies to hide the theft. He was going to go public, expose them, have them prosecuted. Damien's hands clenched into fists at his sides. That night he died in his sleep. Peacefully, the coroner said. A blessing for a man his age. But you don't believe that. I hired a private investigator. The autopsy showed elevated levels of digoxin, a heart medication my grandfather didn't take. In small doses, it's therapeutic. In large doses, it causes cardiac arrest that looks completely natural in an elderly patient. He turned to face her, and his expression was haunted. Someone killed him to cover up the fraud. And I think Vanessa knows who. Elena felt the whiskey glass slip from her nerveless fingers. It fell in slow motion, shattering against the hardwood floor in an explosion of crystal and amber liquid that seemed to echo her fracturing understanding of reality. Vanessa works in finance, Damien continued, apparently not noticing or not caring about the broken glass. She has connections throughout the industry, including several board members at Blackwood Technologies. When we were dating, she always asked careful questions about the company's finances, about my grandfather's health, about the succession plan. I thought she was just interested in my life. Now I realized she was gathering intelligence. For whom? Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. That's what I've been trying to figure out for the past 4 months. That's why I needed to marry quickly. Not just to satisfy the will, but to secure my position as CEO before whoever killed my grandfather could make their move. If I don't control the company, I can't investigate from the inside. And if they realize I'm investigating—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elena's mind reeled, trying to process this avalanche of information. Murder, fraud, corporate espionage. This wasn't the simple transactional arrangement she'd signed up for. This was something far more dangerous. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. "Why did you let me walk into this blind?" "Because I thought I could keep you separate from it. I thought if you didn't know, you'd be safer." Damien's voice carried a note of something that might have been regret. "I underestimated Vanessa. And I underestimated how much she's willing to risk to protect whoever's pulling her strings. So tonight, when she threatened to expose our arrangement, she was warning me, telling me she knows what I'm doing, and she can destroy it all with one phone call to my grandfather's estate lawyers. If they find evidence our marriage is a sham, the will is invalidated. I lose the company, and whoever killed my grandfather gets away with it." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Elena thought of her mother recovering in a private facility, of Miguel's college tuition being paid, of the $20 million she'd been promised. All of it suddenly felt blood-stained. "I should leave," she said quietly. "This isn't what I agreed to. You're using me as cover for a murder investigation. If someone killed your grandfather to protect their secrets, what makes you think I won't let anything happen to you?" Damien crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, and for the first time since she'd known him, he touched her without an audience requiring a performance. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his eyes held an intensity that was almost frightening. "I swear to you, Elena, I will protect you. Whatever it takes." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why would you care? I'm just a convenient solution to your problem. You said it yourself. No emotional entanglement, no complications. Just a transaction." Something flickered across his face, something raw and unguarded that disappeared almost before she could identify it. His hands dropped from her shoulders and he stepped back, putting professional distance between them once more. "Because despite what my grandfather believed, I'm not completely heartless," he said finally. "You didn't ask for any of this. You deserve better than being collateral damage in someone else's war." Elena wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe there was genuine humanity beneath the cold corporate exterior. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we continue as planned. You remain my wife. We maintain the fiction of our marriage, and you stay as far away from Blackwood Technologies and anyone associated with it as possible." His expression hardened. "And if Vanessa or anyone else approaches you with questions or threats, you tell me immediately. No matter what they offer you, no matter what they threaten you with, you tell me." "I'm not stupid enough to trust people trying to cover up murder," Elena said sharply. "Give me some credit. I'm giving you the truth, which is more than I've given anyone else." Damien moved to his desk and pulled out a small device that looked like a phone. "This is a direct line to my head of security. His name is Marcus. If you ever feel unsafe, if anything happens that concerns you, you call him. He'll be with you in minutes." Elena took the device with shaking hands, the weight of it somehow making everything more real. This wasn't a romance or a business arrangement, or even a sophisticated con. This was survival. "There's one more thing," Damien said, and something in his tone made Elena's stomach drop. "The estate lawyers are conducting a surprise audit of our marriage in 3 days. They're sending an investigator to observe us, to verify that our relationship is genuine. 3 days? We can barely have a conversation without arguing. How are we supposed to convince a professional investigator that we're actually married? We're going to have to become very good actors very quickly." Damien's jaw set in a determined line. "Starting tomorrow, we're going to spend every available moment together. Meals, conversations, public appearances. We need to build chemistry, establish patterns, create a history of genuine intimacy." "Genuine intimacy," Elena repeated hollowly. "Between 2 people who are strangers. Between 2 people who have no choice but to make this work." He met her eyes steadily. "Can you do it?" Elena thought of her mother, slowly healing from surgery that had saved her life. She thought of Miguel, finally able to focus on his studies instead of worrying about money. She thought of the alternative, returning to poverty, to desperation, to a life of diminishing options and increasing debt. "I can do it," she said, and meant it. She'd come this far. She'd sold her honesty, her privacy, her self-respect. What was a little more pretending? What was pretending to love a man who dragged her into a conspiracy involving murder, fraud, and corporate warfare? As she left Damien's office and returned to her isolated wing of the penthouse, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching, waiting for them to make a mistake that would prove fatal. She stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the glittering city that had never felt more alien, more dangerous. In 4 weeks, her life had been completely transformed. In 3 days, she'd have to convince a professional investigator that she was genuinely in love with a man she barely knew. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a traitorous thought whispered, what if pretending becomes easier than you expect? What if the line between performance and reality blurs so thoroughly you can't find your way back? Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered into the darkness, what have I gotten myself into? The city offered no answers, only the endless glitter of lights, like stars that had fallen to earth and forgotten how to find their way home. The investigator arrived on a Thursday morning that felt weighted with significance, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Eleanor had barely slept for 3 days, her dreams haunted by Vanessa's knowing smile and the echo of breaking glass. She and Damien had spent every available moment together, crafting a relationship from whole cloth, learning each other's habits, memorizing small details, building the infrastructure of intimacy that most couples developed over months or years. It was exhausting. It was also becoming dangerously convincing. Dr. Patricia Morrison turned out to be a silver-haired woman in her 60s with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd heard every lie the human heart could manufacture. She arrived precisely at 9, carrying a leather portfolio and an expression of professional skepticism. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, she said, shaking both their hands with firm efficiency. Thank you for accommodating this review. I understand it may feel invasive, but the estate's lawyers want to ensure the terms of the will are being honored in spirit, as well as letter. We have nothing to hide, Damien said smoothly, his hand finding Elena's with practiced ease. Our marriage may have been quick, but it's completely genuine. Dr. Morrison's smile suggested she'd heard similar claims before. Then you won't mind if I spend the day observing your natural interactions. Just go about your normal routine. Pretend I'm not here, pretend. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. The morning passed in carefully choreographed domesticity. Eleanor made breakfast, while Damien read the newspaper, a routine they'd established only 3 days ago but performed as if they'd done it for years. They discussed his meetings for the day, her plans to visit her mother that afternoon, the charity event they'd need to attend next week. To an outside observer, it must have looked seamless. Dr. Morrison watched it all with the focused attention of a scientist examining slides under a microscope. She made notes in her portfolio, asked occasional questions. How did you first know you were in love? What's your favorite thing about each other? How do you handle disagreements? Sass and generally gave the impression of someone who could see through walls. By noon, Elena's nerves were stretched so thin she thought she might shatter. They were having lunch, food she could barely taste, when Dr. Morrison asked the question Eleanor had been dreading. Mrs. Blackwood, forgive me for being blunt, but there's been considerable speculation about the speed of your courtship and the significant difference in your backgrounds. How do you respond to people who suggest this marriage might be motivated by financial considerations rather than genuine affection? The room went silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Eleanor felt Damien tense beside her, ready to defend her, but she placed her hand on his arm, a gesture that was becoming more natural than she wanted to admit. People will always have opinions, Eleanor said carefully. When I met Damien, I didn't see his money or his status. I saw someone who treated me like a person worth listening to. Someone who asked about my dreams and actually seemed interested in the answers. Someone who... She paused, searching for words that would sound true because they were true. Someone who made me feel less alone. It was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks, and the realization made her chest tighten with something that felt dangerously like actual emotion. Damien's eyes found hers, and in them she saw surprise and something else, something that made her breath catch, And you, Mr. Blackwood. Dr. Morrison's pen was poised over her notebook. What attracted you to Eleanor? Damien was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving Elena's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, almost hesitant. She's real, he said simply. In a world full of people performing versions of themselves, Eleanor is completely, devastatingly genuine. She says what she means. She does what she promises. She doesn't play games or manipulate or calculate. She's just herself, and that's rarer than any treasure I could buy. The words hung in the air between them, and Elena felt something crack open in her chest, that same dangerous feeling from their wedding kiss, but stronger now, more insistent. She told herself it was just good acting, just the performance they'd rehearsed. But her racing heart and the flush spreading across her skin suggested otherwise. Dr. Morrison made a note, her expression thoughtful. I'd like to speak with you separately, if you don't mind. Standard procedure for these evaluations. The interviews that followed were excruciating. Dr. Morrison asked Elena about their first kiss in his hotel suite, soft and unexpected. Their favorite shared activity, cooking together, though that was invented whole cloth 3 days ago. Their plans for the future, vague and carefully non-committal. Elena answered with the careful precision of someone walking a tightrope over an abyss, knowing that one wrong word could end everything. When it was finally over, when Dr. Morrison had packed up her portfolio and headed toward the door, Elena felt like she'd run a marathon. But then the investigator paused at the threshold and turned back. You know what convinced me? She said, looking between them. It wasn't your answers. Those were well-rehearsed, perhaps a bit too well-rehearsed. It was the way you look at each other when you think no one's watching. The way Mr. Blackwood's shoulders relax when you're in the room, Mrs. Blackwood. The way you unconsciously lean toward him when you're nervous. She smiled slightly. Those are things you can't fake. Not convincingly. After she left, Eleanor and Damien stood in the foyer in stunned silence. They'd passed. Against all odds, they'd actually pulled it off. We did it, Elena whispered. We did, Damien agreed, but he sounded troubled rather than relieved. That night, they should have celebrated. They should have returned to their careful distance, their professional arrangement, their separate wings of the penthouse. Instead, they found themselves in the kitchen at midnight, unable to sleep, sitting across from each other at the island like two people who'd survived a disaster and didn't quite know how to process it. Can I ask you something? Elena said, finally breaking the silence. Anything. Earlier when you said I was real, did you mean that? Or was it just for Dr. Morrison? Damien was quiet for so long Elena thought he might not answer. Then I meant it. Every word. Why? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Because you are, he said simply, meeting her eyes. Because in 4 weeks you haven't once tried to use your position for advantage. You haven't demanded more money, or asked for favors for friends, or leveraged your access to me for personal gain. You've just been yourself. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Elena laughed hollowly. That's just called being a decent person, Damien. It's not some extraordinary virtue. In my world, it absolutely is. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Before he could continue, his phone erupted with urgent buzzing. He glanced at it and his face went ashen. What? It's Marcus. He was already moving toward his office. There's been a break-in at your mother's facility. Someone tried to access her room. Elena's blood turned to ice. She's fine. Marcus had extra security in place as a precaution. They caught the intruder. Damien's voice was hard as steel. But Elena, whoever sent them wasn't trying to hurt your mother. They were leaving a message. What kind of message? He pulled up something on his computer and turned the screen toward her. It was a photograph, taken by the facility's security camera. A man in dark clothes stood in the hallway outside her mother's room, holding a sign with words written in thick black marker, "Back off or she's next." Elena's legs gave out, and she found herself sitting on the floor, her entire body shaking with a fear so intense it felt like drowning. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a performance or a business arrangement or a lie she could maintain for 18 months and then walk away from. This was real danger, real consequences, real threats against the person she loved most in the world. I'm moving your mother to a private location, Damien was saying, already making calls. Somewhere no one can find her. And I'm putting round-the-clock security on you, your brother. No. Eleanor's voice came out stronger than she felt. No more hiding, no more protection, no more carefully managed ignorance. If someone's threatening my family, I need to know everything. Not the edited version you think I can handle. Everything. Starting with who killed your grandfather and why. Damien looked at her for a long moment, seemed to wage an internal battle, then nodded. All right. But not here. If someone's escalating to direct threats, they might have surveillance on us. There's a place. My grandfather's cabin upstate. No one knows about it except family. We'll go there, and I'll tell you everything. They left within the hour, taking one of Damien's cars and driving through the night, while Marcus handled security arrangements for Eleanor's family. The cabin turned out to be a sprawling log structure, hidden deep in the Adirondacks, isolated and defensible, exactly what they needed. Inside, with a fire crackling and the world locked safely outside, Damien finally told her the whole truth. 6 months ago, my grandfather discovered that someone had created a series of shell companies using Blackwood Technologies' resources. They'd been siphoning money for years, not enough to be obvious, but enough that it added up to nearly $100 million. Elena's eyes widened. $100 million? He traced it back to 3 members of the board. Richard Chen, Vanessa's father Donald Hartley, and a venture capitalist named Marcus Strauss. They were working together, using the stolen money to fund a competing tech company, one that would directly challenge Blackwood Technologies once they'd weakened us enough from the inside. And when your grandfather found out, he called an emergency board meeting. He was going to expose them, have them prosecuted, everything. But that night, before he could make his evidence public, he died. Damien's hands clenched into fists. I found his files 3 days after the funeral. He'd hidden them in his personal safe, copies of everything, detailed proof of the fraud, and a note saying if anything happened to him, I should assume it wasn't natural causes. So you started investigating, as discreetly as possible. But one of them must have realized what I was doing. That's when the pressure started. Anonymous messages warning me to accept the natural death story, hints that continuing to investigate would be dangerous for people I cared about. He met her eyes. That's when I realized I needed to secure my position as CEO before they could make a move to remove me. If I wasn't in control of the company, I couldn't investigate from the inside. And that's when I came up with the plan to marry quickly to satisfy the will's conditions. And you chose me because I was convenient. Nobody. Easy to control. I chose you because you were honest, Damien corrected. Because I needed someone I could trust not to be working with them. Someone who had no connections to my world, no divided loyalties, no reason to betray me. Except for 20 million reasons, Elena pointed out bitterly. Except you've never once asked about that money, he said quietly. In 4 weeks, you've never demanded a larger settlement, never asked when you'd see the funds, never leveraged your position. You've just focused on your mother's health and keeping up the charade. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Elena stood and moved to the window, staring out at the dark forest. What happens now? If they're threatening my family, if they're willing to escalate to violence, I have enough evidence to go to the authorities, Damien said. My grandfather's documentation, plus the financial forensics my investigator has compiled. But the moment I make that move, they'll know. And they'll do whatever it takes to discredit me, including exposing our marriage as a fraud. So we're trapped. If we don't act, they keep threatening us. If we do act, we lose everything anyway. Not everything. Damien stood and crossed to her, turning her to face him. Elna, there's a third option. One I should have offered you from the beginning, which is, we make it real. The words hung between them like a confession, like a prayer, like a grenade with the pin pulled. What? Elena's voice was barely audible. We stop pretending. We make this marriage genuine, not just legally, but emotionally. We become actual partners, not just co-conspirators in a fraud. His hands framed her face, gentle but urgent. If we do that, they can't use the marriage against us. More importantly, if we do that, you'll have every resource I have at my disposal to protect your family. Not as part of a contract, but because that's what husbands do. Damien, we don't... Elena's thoughts fragmented. Unable to form coherent arguments against something so insane, so impossible, so terrifyingly appealing. We barely know each other. I know you wake up at 5 a.m. every morning because you can't sleep when you're worried. I know you call your mother twice a day, even when she's sleeping, just to hear her voice on the voicemail. I know you cry silently in the shower so no one will hear you. I know you're the strongest, most genuine person I've ever met, and somewhere in the last 4 weeks, this stopped being pretend for me. Eleanor's breath caught. You can't mean that. This is Stockholm Syndrome or convenience or... It's love, he said simply, and the word hit her like a physical blow. I'm in love with you, Elena. I don't know when it happened, maybe when you told Dr. Morrison I made you feel less alone, because that's exactly what you did for me. Maybe before that, when I watched you refuse my first offer because you have principles money can't buy. Maybe the moment I saw you standing in my suite, terrified but refusing to back down. But it happened, and now I can't unknow it. This is insane, Elena whispered, but her treacherous heart was hammering, and her body was leaning toward him despite every logical instinct screaming that this was a mistake. Probably, he agreed. But I'm done pretending to feel nothing when I feel everything. I'm done maintaining careful distance when all I want is to close the gap between us. I'm done treating this like a business arrangement when it's become the most important relationship in my life. And if I don't feel the same? The question came out weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. Then I'll honor our original agreement. 18 months, then an amicable divorce, and I'll still protect your family because that's the right thing to do. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she realized she was crying. But Elena, I don't think you're as indifferent as you're pretending to be. I think you feel this too. I think it terrifies you because it's real, and real things can hurt in ways contracts never can. He was right. God help her, he was absolutely right. Somewhere between the careful performances and the practiced domesticity and the long conversations at midnight, she'd fallen for him. Not the polished public version, but the man underneath, brilliant and broken, powerful and terrified, capable of both ruthless efficiency and unexpected gentleness. If we do this, she said slowly, if we make this real, what happens when it falls apart? When you realize I don't fit in your world? When the novelty wears off? What happens when you realize I'm not the cold corporate machine you thought I was? He counted. What happens when you discover I leave coffee cups everywhere, and I'm terrible at remembering birthdays, and I have nightmares about my grandfather's death? What happens when real life replaces the performance, and it's messy and complicated and imperfect? I don't know, Elena admitted. Neither do I, but I'd rather find out together than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. He leaned his forehead against hers, and the gesture felt more intimate than any kiss. Take a chance on me, Elena, on us, not for money or contracts or protection, just because this feels right in a way nothing else ever has. She should say no. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a terrible idea, that mixing real emotions with their complicated situation was a recipe for disaster, that falling in love with a man embroiled in corporate conspiracy and possible murder was categorically insane. But when had rationality ever mattered when it came to matters of the heart? Okay, she whispered, and felt the last of her careful defenses crumble. Okay, let's try. Let's make this real. He kissed her then, not the careful, measured kiss of their wedding, but something desperate and honest and completely uncontrolled. Elena melted into it, into him, finally allowing herself to feel everything she'd been suppressing for weeks. His hands were in her hair, hers clutching his shirt, and for the first time since this whole insane situation began, she felt like herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers again. We're going to figure this out, he said. The investigation, the threats, all of it. Together. Together, Elena agreed and meant it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Damien compiled his evidence and prepared to present it to federal investigators. Eleanor's mother and brother were moved to a secure location. Marcus and his team worked around the clock to ensure their safety. And through it all, Elena and Damien stopped pretending. They learned each other for real this time, not memorizing facts for an audience, but genuinely discovering who they were beneath the roles they'd been playing. They laughed together, argued about everything from politics to pizza toppings, stayed up too late talking about dreams and fears and the complicated weight of expectations. It should have been harder. It should have felt forced. Instead, it felt like coming home. The confrontation, when it came, happened at a Blackwood Technologies board meeting. Damien had called it without warning, refusing to provide an agenda. Eleanor sat in the observation gallery, her hand clasped in Marcus's, watching as her husband stood before the board that had conspired to murder his grandfather. "Gentlemen," Damien began, his voice carrying across the room with absolute authority, "we're here to discuss embezzlement, fraud, and murder." The room erupted. Richard Chen went pale. Donald Hartley blustered denials. Marcus Strauss tried to leave and found his way blocked by federal agents who'd been waiting outside. Damien presented the evidence methodically, clinically, without emotion. Financial records, shell company documentation, the private investigator's report, the toxicology findings from his grandfather's body, and finally, the recording his grandfather had made 3 days before his death, stating his suspicions and his fear that something would happen to him. By the end, all 3 men were in handcuffs. Vanessa, who'd been caught trying to destroy evidence, was also arrested. The scope of the conspiracy became clear. Not just embezzlement, but industrial espionage, bribery, and ultimately premeditated murder. When it was over, when the federal agents had led the conspirators away and the remaining board members sat in stunned silence, Damien looked up at the observation gallery. His eyes found Elena's and he smiled, a real smile, unguarded and relieved and full of something that made her chest ache with joy. She met him outside the boardroom, and he pulled her into his arms without hesitation, without caring who saw or what they thought. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "It's finally over. What happens now?" Elena asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Now we live," he said simply. "No more lies, no more performances, no more looking over our shoulders. Just us figuring out how to be married for real. That might be harder than bringing down a criminal conspiracy," Elena teased, but her smile was radiant. "Probably," he agreed, "but I'm looking forward to every complicated minute of it." Epilogue. 18 months later. Elena stood in the kitchen of their penthouse, their home. She'd learned to call it, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. Behind her she heard Damien's footsteps, felt his arms wrap around her waist, felt his chin rest on her shoulder in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. "Happy anniversary," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's not our anniversary," she pointed out. "That was 2 months ago. Anniversary of the end of our contract period," he clarified. "The day you could have walked away with your $20 million and never looked back." Elena turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "I couldn't have walked away if I'd tried." "You're stuck with me, Blackwood. Best deal I ever made," he said, and kissed her properly. Her mother was healthy now, volunteering at a community center, and spoiling her grandchildren because, yes, Eleanor thought with a secret smile, there would be grandchildren sooner than anyone expected. Miguel had graduated with honors and was starting his own tech company, funded by the settlement money from the Blackwood Technologies lawsuit. The conspirators were serving lengthy prison sentences. The company was thriving under Damien's leadership, restructured to prevent the kind of corruption that had cost his grandfather his life. And Elena had discovered that she did fit in Damien's world. Once she stopped trying to become someone else and simply remained herself. She'd started a foundation providing legal and financial assistance to immigrant families, using her own experience to help others navigate the system. She split her time between the foundation and occasionally teaching English at the community college where she'd once struggled through classes between shifts. She hadn't become a society wife or a trophy or a decoration. She'd become herself, more fully than she'd ever been able to before, and Damien loved her for it. "I never thanked you properly," Elena said now, pulling back to look at him, "for taking a chance on me that night, for offering me the deal that changed my life." "You took a chance on me too," Damien reminded her. "You saw past the money and the power to the person underneath. You made me want to be better than I was." "We made each other better," Elena corrected. "That's what love does. Is that what we're calling it, love?" His eyes sparkled with familiar teasing. "What else would you call it?" "A miracle," he said seriously. "Lightning in a bottle. The most improbable, impossible, illogical thing that ever happened, and the best decision I ever made." Elena kissed him again, tasting coffee and promises, and a future that stretched out before them like an unwritten story. Outside, the city was waking up, millions of people beginning their days, chasing their dreams, hoping for their own miracles. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers stood wrapped in each other's arms, having discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as desperate bargains. That sometimes love sneaks in through the back door while you're busy pretending it doesn't exist. That sometimes the performance becomes so convincing it transforms into truth. Elena had rejected the millionaire's first proposal, the one that was all money and contracts and carefully bounded expectations. But what he'd done that night and every night since had left her speechless in the best possible way. He'd shown her that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in trust, in partnership, in the quiet moments between two people who chose each other every single day. "Coffee?" she asked, pulling away reluctantly. "Coffee," he agreed. "And then we should probably call your mother. She's been texting me all morning about Sunday dinner plans." "She loves you more than she loves me at this point," Elena laughed. "Impossible. But I do make a very compelling son-in-law." As they moved through their morning routine, no longer performed for investigators or audiences, but simply lived, Elena thought about the scared woman who'd stood in a hotel suite 4 months ago, clutching an envelope and facing an impossible choice. If she could go back, would she change anything? Would she run from the offer? Save herself the fear and the lies and the danger? No, not for a second, because sometimes the scariest choices lead to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes selling your soul for the right reasons doesn't damn you, it saves you. Sometimes the man who looks like a devil is actually an angel in disguise, just waiting for someone brave enough to see him clearly. And sometimes refusing what you think you want opens the door to everything you never knew you needed. Elena Rodriguez Blackwood had learned that lesson the hard way. But as she stood in her sunlit kitchen, her husband's laughter filling the space, her mother's health restored, her future bright with possibility, she wouldn't trade that hard-won wisdom for anything in the world, not even $20 million. Reflection. Some prices seem too high to pay until you realize what you're actually buying. Elena walked into Damien's life expecting to trade 18 months for financial security. She walked out having traded her fear for courage, her isolation for partnership, her survival for actual living. The real transaction wasn't money for marriage. It was two broken people exchanging their carefully constructed walls for the terrifying vulnerability of genuine connection. She refused his proposal, the one that was just business. But she accepted his heart when he finally offered it without conditions, without contracts, without escape clauses. That's the thing about love. You can't negotiate it, can't control it, can't reduce it to terms and conditions. You can only open the door when it knocks and hope you're brave enough to let it stay. Elena was. And in the end, that made all the difference.